This is probably one of my most fun questions that I get to answer because my answer is literally, it's not even opinion, it's fact. So there's no arguing my answer to this. So the question is arbitrage versus owning when it comes to short term rentals or Airbnb investments. And I'll just keep it really simple. Okay. So, one of the draws, and by the way, for context, I know all of this because I personally, 4 years ago, when I was getting into investing in Airbnb and short term rentals, I looked into all of the different options. Okay. So, arbitrage is this sexy, shiny object of a model. It is the basically the dream that we're being told is that we can own infinite amount of real estate without having to buy any of it, and we can tap into this amazing opportunity of throwing it on Airbnb, and then we can cash in because we don't have to take any of the risk of owning the property. We don't have to maintain the property, and we don't have to pay taxes on the property, and then we can make all this money by hosting guests in the property, right? That we are arbitraging. Okay, let me give you a couple examples. First of all, biggest example. So you've missed the entire point. If you think arbitrage is better than owning, here you have missed the entire point of owning real estate. Okay, what does every wealthy person you know own? All of them. They all own real estate, and they own a lot of it. There's lots of reasons for that. Let me give you one quick example. Uh, if you do arbitrage versus owning your own real estate for this, that's the equivalent of McDonald's running just a restaurant and not owning real estate. So who's one of the largest real estate holders in the world? McDonald's. Okay? How? Because every time they launch a new location, they're either purchasing or they're building the actual real estate asset that the restaurant operates out of. All right? So it would be they probably wouldn't have made it if they didn't do the real estate side. Okay? So they're one of the largest corporations because they own all of that real estate. So this is what that translates to you. If you go and arbitrage real estate and you don't own it, you're missing the whole point of becoming wealthy through the asset, okay, and having appreciation of the asset, and then having leverage that you are able to pull into with the asset, okay? So you've missed the whole point of the asset, which is really the biggest draw. That should be a bigger draw to you than even the rental income. The rental income's sweet, don't get me wrong, but if you arbitrage something, I just talked to a guy. He wants to arbitrage some nice condos. Great, sounds good. You don't have to build them, right? You don't have to go and pay a bunch of money for them. Awesome. But here's the problem: you are signing up because you're going to have to sign a lease, right? These landlords aren't dumb, by the way, most of them. But you're going to have to sign a lease. So guess what? You're on the hook. So actually, you do absorb quite a bit of risk. Because what happens if, something terrible happens and you don't follow Dana's lead and you try and launch your own Airbnb and you don't get enough renters, you have to pay the rent on a building that you don't own. So you'd actually be better off owning the building because at least you're putting money toward the asset and that you own instead of the actual landlord that is now taking the money. These landlords aren't dumb. The second thing is they're banking on you doing all the work to get the renters in there to then make their rental payment, right? So either way, you're on the hook. You have to put the money in to pay the rent, or you have to put the time in and gain the expertise to market it properly to make sure that it's at the capacity that it needs to be or the occupancy that you need to have in order for the numbers to work. So all of a sudden, this whole nice little arbitrage model is not so good because you're actually making the landlord all the money by doing all of the work and absorbing all of the risk. Okay? So actually, I'm sitting back thinking, man, I should just buy a bunch of property and let these people arbitrage it for me because I'm cutting out about half the work to get twice as much of the benefit. Okay? That's the truth about arbitrage. So has it worked for others? Of course. Everybody, can find and point to a story that somebody had success with. But I'm telling you from my own personal experience and from looking at many people who come into my world having looked into this great shiny object, a business model of arbitrage. It is not all it's cracked up to be. You absorb all the risk of that monthly lease that you have to pay, and then you sign off on. You also absorb the risk of any damage that the tenant may do to the property that you have signed up for, taking care of and maintaining. And also, you're doing all the work of getting the guests in and out and serving them and all that stuff, and you don't get the benefit of the ownership of the asset. So, point is, I would not pursue arbitrage. And even that draw of, oh, I don't have to come out of pocket with any money. Well, what you're coming out of pocket with is you're coming out of pocket with a lot of risk, because you are going to have to pay. Okay, that lease that's not going to go away if you accidentally oopsie and if something doesn't work out right. And then number two, you also have the risk of all of the time and effort and energy invested into a building that you don't even own. So what happens? You signed a 6-month, 12-month lease. You do really well. Great. I built this thing up, and I'm making whatever you want to call it, $500 a month, $1,000 a month, $2,000 a month. Awesome. Well, what's stopping the landlord from 6 months to 12 months from now looking at exactly what you're doing and then literally just creating their own version of it and then booting you? What's stopping them from doing that? Nothing. Right? And that's what companies do, and it's a sucky world, but that's what happens. Okay, if you didn't know this, look at how franchises work. Part of their business model, and that's not every franchise, but a lot of them. If you ever notice, have you ever seen like two franchise coffee shops, like Caribou Coffee or something, two of them suspiciously close together, or like 3 or 4 in a town that doesn't really need that many? Here's why that's happening. Okay, the smart owner of the Caribou, the corporation, they are allowing folks to launch their own franchise version of it in a city that they think is going to do well, and they can experiment, put their money and all that good stuff and time and effort into building it, right? And then it does well. Awesome. All right, so what does corporate do? They look at all the best performing ones that are not owned by corporate, that are independently owned, and what are they going to do? They launch another one right next to it, and then they undercut them, and they steal their market, and then pretty soon, guess who's left? The corporate owned one. Okay, so it's the same thing that's happening. It's a dirty business. Unfortunately, it really is. But the same thing is happening with arbitrage. Like, landlords are launching apartments and these things that look like, great, potentially great short-term rental arbitrage, viable buildings or whatever. And then good intended folks like us, we try and arbitrage them and try to make a buck, an honest buck. And what happens is, even if it goes well, a lot of times it doesn't. You don't hear about these stories often, but they are happening. It doesn't go well, but even if it does go well, what can happen? The landlord can just take over. Awesome. Thank you for putting all the time, effort, and energy and risk into launching this for me and proving the concept that an STR can work for this building. I have, I have collected money along the process, and I've collected all the work that you've put in, and I'm just going to go ahead and take over. So that's the unfortunate thing that happens, and that's the world we live in. So to avoid that, don't do arbitrage. Okay? There's plenty of ways that you can afford to get into actual ownership of these assets, and I show you them. There's 5 ways to fund a deal inside the Cabin Secrets program. 2 of the 5 don't require any cash out of pocket. I bought my first cabin with no money out of my pocket. Another 2 of the 5 don't require a bank at all. So there's creative ways you can purchase real estate assets without banks, and I personally have done a ton of that myself. So with that being said, go over to the Cabin Secrets program, watch the video. I share a lot more than this over at cabinsecrets.com. We'll see you over there.